So the headlines this morning, Downing Street has confirmed it's going to grant hundreds of new licences for North Sea oil and gas exploration. It's also confirmed the Acorn Carbon Capture project in Aberdeenshire is going to receive part of a £20 billion fund for similar initiatives. It comes, of course, as the Conservatives are facing internal divisions over their green policies. Let's speak to the Prime Minister about that. He is with us now. Rishi Sunak is here. Good morning, Prime Minister.
Good morning.
Thanks very much indeed for being with us this morning. Your team
pleasure.
trailed this overnight as your big interview, but they've also told us, rather disappointingly, we're strictly limited to 5 minutes with you. It seems a bit strange that, but let's get on with it, shall we? You could have...
Strange way to start the interview, but I'm just heading on my way up to Scotland.
Well,
I
want to explain. I want to explain to listeners why they perhaps think that we've cut it short when we haven't. Listen, you could have announced this funding 2 years ago, but you snubbed this project back then in favour of two projects that are in, coincidentally or otherwise, red wall seats. That was the suggestion at the time. Are you doing this now because you're targeting the northeast of Scotland in the next election?
No, what this is about is strengthening our energy security for the whole of the United Kingdom. I think we've seen over the last year the impact of Putin's war. We don't want to be in hock to dictators like that when it comes to our energy. And an important part of guarding against that is investing in our North Sea. And that's what today's announcement is about, making sure that we have future oil and gas licensing rounds. Important that we get energy from here at home. That supports the jobs, 200,000 jobs across that industry, particularly in Scotland. But we're also announcing today investments in carbon capture and storage, and Acorn being one of the clusters that's been in reserve, actually, the past period, where you talked about other places. I wouldn't disparage those bids. They were very strong from the northeast of England, but also Merseyside. We're adding to those today with two other clusters, including one in Aberdeenshire. Again, that's going to be great for Scottish jobs and help us transition to net zero. So ultimately, this is a good story for the UK overall. It's not about political seats, it's just about doing the right thing for the country. We've got 4 clusters now across the country that will help us transition to net zero in a new industry, and we're strengthening our energy security by investing in the North Sea and getting oil and gas rounds there.
A share of £20 billion. How much money is Acorn going to get, and when's it going to come?
That will be a function of all the individual bids making progress and coming to government and working through their plans. Obviously, this is new, and they will need to make sure that they put sound business cases forward. But there is funding available over the next several years to bring this technology to life. We're very lucky in the UK, actually, if you look across Europe in particular.
There are no specifics on the details of this today, are there?
No, well, this is about announcing the clusters. So this is the groups of companies from industry in regions who have come to government and said, we would like, as a cluster, to be considered to be one of the people that you deal with when you look to bring this technology forward and use it in the UK. It's great and exciting news. It's what the Acorn cluster have been asking for. I'm delighted that today we can make sure that that happens. And then over the coming months and years, we will see great progress. This is not something that happens overnight. This is something that will take time, but it will create jobs in the UK, but in Scotland in particular, in Aberdeenshire, which is fantastic. We think it will support over 20,000 jobs, in fact, the carbon capture and storage industry, but also help us transition to net zero, because it is an important part of how we will get to net zero, is by using carbon capture and storage.
And yet you're announcing 100 new North Sea oil and gas drilling licences, apparently. Is that right?
Yes, that is right, and that's absolutely the right thing to do. If you look at all the projections...
In what way does that enhance our chances of getting to net zero?
Well, because even when we reach net zero in 2050, a quarter of our energy needs will still come from oil and gas, and domestic gas production has about a quarter or a third of the carbon footprint of imported gas. So not only is it better for our energy security not to rely on foreign dictators for that energy, not only is it good for jobs, particularly Scottish jobs, it's actually better for the environment, because there's no point in importing stuff from halfway around the world with 2 to 3 times the carbon footprint of the stuff we've got at home. That makes absolutely no sense.
How much of our gas do we get from Russia?
There's a globally traded market, but what the point is, we wouldn't want to increase our reliance.
How much of our gas do we import from Russia?
Well, thankfully now very little because of what's happened. We did little to start with, and we've moved away from it as a result of the invasion last year.
So how
but in a globally traded market,
3% in 2020. How does that embolden Vladimir Putin?
because it's a globally traded market, and you can see the impact on energy prices. I think your listeners will know what's happened to their energy bills over the past couple of years. So in spite of us directly not importing a huge amount of oil and gas directly from Russia, we're still heavily impacted by what happens when energy supplies are weaponized by dictators because they're traded in a global market. I mean, it's just economically incoherent to say we're not impacted by that. Just look at anyone's energy bill. I mean, so that's what happens in a globally traded market. So it's important that we increase homegrown sources of energy to improve our resilience, but also that's good for Scottish in particular jobs in the UK. It's good for tax revenue as well, which funds our public services. And given we're going to need energy from the fossil fuels for the foreseeable future as we transition to net zero, it makes no sense not to use the resources that we've got here at home.
Is 2050 still realistic as a target for net zero?
I mean, 2050 is our target, and it's thankfully one that we have encouraged lots of countries around the world to follow as well. We have a great track record. If you look at our record, we've decarbonised faster than any other G7 country.
You're not meeting your climate change targets just now, though, are you?
As I just said, we've decarbonised faster than any country in the G7.
You're not meeting your own targets?
We have. We've met every single carbon budget target that we have set ourselves. Every single one has been met. I don't know where you're getting your facts from, but every single one of the government's targets that it's had has been met.
Let me ask
people might want to speculate on the future, but they speculated on the future previously. Let me ask you, wrong. Every single target that the government has had
in this limited time. Let me ask you about another that you've set, because you were positioning yourself as the driver's friend yesterday. You said Labour were an anti-motorist party. Sales of petrol and diesel cars are meant to stop by 2030. Will that policy still stand as long as you're Prime Minister?
Yeah, that's about new cars, not existing cars.
Yeah.
So it's the sale of new cars. Yeah, that's been the government's policy for a long time. It remains the government's policy. But what I've said more generally on my approach is that we will transition to net zero. I'm committed to it, but we'll do it in a proportionate and pragmatic way that doesn't necessarily add burden or cost to families' bills, particularly at a time when inflation is higher than any of us would have liked. And more generally on motorists, I think actually it was down recently, the ULEZ expansion that your listeners may or may not be familiar about, which I don't think is the right thing. I think at a time when, as I said, families are looking at bills and worried about inflation, adding £12.50 on to their life every time they visit the supermarket or a GP or drop their kids off at football practice does not seem to me to be the right thing to do. Yeah,
listen, I am being shouted at now to let you go because our time frustratingly has run out. Hopefully we'll get a chance to speak to you at greater length at some point in the near future to really get into some of these subjects. Let me just ask you finally before you go, how are you getting up here to make this green announcement today? Private jet?
I'll be flying as I normally would, and that is the most efficient use of my time. But again, I think actually that question brings to life a great debate here. If you or others think that the answer to climate change is getting people to ban everything that they're doing, to stop people flying, to stop people going on holiday, I mean, I think that's absolutely the wrong approach. Right, that's absolutely the wrong approach. I mean, every Prime Minister before me has also used planes to travel around the United Kingdom because it's an efficient use of time for the person running the country, so I can keep focusing on delivering for people. But if your approach to climate change is to say no one should go on holiday, no one should take on a plane, I think you are completely and utterly wrong.
Am I?
Right, that is absolutely not the approach to tackling climate change.
There's a difference between travelling by private jet and taking a flight.
What we are doing is investing in sustainable aviation fuel as one of the new technologies like carbon capture and storage will help us make the transition. It's not about banning flying. It's about investing in new technologies like sustainable aviation fuel that will make flying more sustainable. That's the right approach to this. But I look forward to having that conversation with you again.
Well,
Thanks very much for having me.
We have to let you go. Will you commit to coming back on and speaking to us longer in future?
I think this is the second time I've been on your show in the short space of time I've been Prime Minister, but I'm sure I'll be there again in the future.
I hope
Thanks
so.
very
Rishi
much.
Sunak, thank you very much indeed. So a big announcement in the northeast of Scotland today coming from the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. That is the home turf of the SNP's Westminster leader Stephen Flynn, who has been asking for funding for the Acorn project, as has the SNP for some years now. Let's speak to him. Good morning, Mr Flynn.
Good morning, Martin. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. You must be delighted with this announcement then, are you? You've got what you wanted?
Well, I think it's probably important to provide your listeners with some context, as I think the Professor did ever so slightly there. So back in 2005, I think it was first mooted that there could be carbon capture and storage in Peterhead. The UK government at that time didn't give it its backing. In the run-up to the independence referendum in 2013, I think it was Ed Davey, the now Lib Dem leader, who was Energy Secretary for the UK, who told us that we would have carbon capture and storage in Peterhead, and then after the independence referendum, that was pulled. And then, of course, just a couple of years ago, we were one of the many bidders right across the UK into the carbon capture and storage pot. And the Acorn project didn't receive the funding at that point either. So whilst I do welcome the fact that we are now in this position, and it is, of course, excellent news for the northeast of Scotland in particular, I'm very frustrated that it's taken 18 years to get to this point.
Yeah, nevertheless, the announcement has come today. So you're happy on balance. Have you got enough detail? Are you happy with what you've heard?
Well, I think in anything that comes from the UK government, the devil will very much be in the detail. But I don't think anyone can step away from the fact that this is a positive step in the right direction after 18 years of dither and delay. And right. I guess the key thing now is making sure, as the Professor has just said there, that the UK government back up this announcement today with real progress in terms of timing and the evaluation process of this project.
The other thing the Professor said there was that it's crucial that we don't overwhelm the amount of carbon that this facility can capture with the granting of huge numbers of licences for carbon-generating fossil fuels to be extracted from the North Sea. Remind me, what exactly is your party's policy on drilling on the North Sea at the moment? New licences or no new licences?
Well, I think in terms of new licences, Martin, if I may, it's important that we take a couple of things into consideration. The first one, of course, is energy security. I think everyone across Scotland is acutely aware of how important energy security is now, given the hike in prices that we all experienced over the last couple of years and the devastating impact it's had on households and indeed businesses. The other aspect of this, of course, has to be the looming climate catastrophe that we face. So what we need to do is ensure that any new licences which are granted, which the UK government appears to have accelerated today, is done on an evidence-based approach which takes into account the climate situation but also wider energy security. And of course, wrapped up within all of that, Martin, is something which is very important to my constituents in the northeast of Scotland, and that's that we ensure that we have a just transition, one that protects jobs and employment going forward. And any early shutdown of the North Sea would put that at risk.
All of that is the UK government's policy as well, isn't it? They want guarantees from licence holders that they will meet energy targets, that they'll comply. They want a just transition, they say.
If I may push back on that, I don't believe that is their specific position, because what we've seen from the UK government today and over recent times is an assertion that they want to get every last drop out of the North Sea. Now, not only is that probably not commercially viable, I don't believe that to be an evidence-based approach. And when they talk about the climate compatibility checkpoints, I think it's fair to say that they could be more robust. I mean, they don't, as I understand it, take into account existing licences, which of course amount for a huge amount of fields. So our positions are very much not the same. I want to see an evidence-based approach, one which is based on a just transition, climate compatibility, but most important of all, perhaps energy security. OK, I mean, you could say at least the Tories are now being clear on what they want to do with this. Humza Yousaf, the First Minister, said recently the difference between your party and Labour is that Labour wants to turn off the taps in the North Sea. You want to extract the profits. I still don't know exactly how many licences could you foresee yourselves granting? Where are you on Rosebank, for example? Well, with all due respect, Martin, I've just set out hopefully as clear as I could do for you the fact that this needs to be an evidence-based approach, and that evidence-based approach needs to take into account a number of different factors as I've laid out there. But if I may, I think the Tories perhaps have been consistent, because not only have they raked in £400 billion from Scotland's North Sea oil and gas sector over recent decades, the reason that they're wanting to withdraw every single ounce of oil and gas from the North Sea is because they want to shore up the UK Treasury. When in actual fact, the discussion that we should be having today and need to be having all the time is how we respond to the United States of America, the European Union, Japan and China and so on and so forth, who are investing huge amounts in the green renewables gold rush, something which Scotland has a plethora of, but which the UK government has decided not to prioritise.
Your government partners, the Greens, say this carbon capture and storage technology is unproven, we can't rely on it. Are they right on that? They're quite sceptical about all this.
I think it's reasonable and to be expected that people in different political parties will have different views over big issues of the day. I obviously disagree with the Greens in relation to this particular project. I think 21,000 jobs in the northeast of Scotland's a good thing. I think that taking carbon that would otherwise be in the atmosphere and storing it under the North Sea in Scottish waters is a good thing. I think the import potential we have in our relationship with other nations and being able to store their carbon could be a good thing. Of course, there is a major obstacle which still exists in relation to that due to our leaving the European Union, which the UK government, of course, still need to resolve. So, and broadly speaking, I think this is a positive project for the northeast of Scotland. That's why I've been trying to secure it throughout my entire time in Parliament, and why the SNP have been trying to secure it for the best part of 18 years.
Two major backers. So there are four major backers of this project, two of which are Shell and Harbour Energy. They've both, over the last couple of years, announced massive profits. I think Shell $15 billion so far this year, and they've weighed in their shareholders fairly substantially, but they've all cut jobs as well. Why are we writing massive cheques with taxpayers' money on this to fossil fuel companies who have pots of cash, it seems, judging by their balance sheets, at least last year?
Well, I don't think anyone would dispute the fact that they've made significant profits. And you mentioned there the plethora of share buybacks which have been undertaken, something which, of course, the UK government have not sought to tax, despite significant SNP pressure in relation to that, in order to boost
But you're happy with us giving them more taxpayers' money?
If I may, Martin, in order to boost support for families right across the country, a right and plausible thing to do. Now, in terms of carbon capture and storage, I think we need to, and indeed the renewables gold rush which is upon us, I think we need to accept the fact that an engineer who works in the fossil fuel industry is going to be the engineer who delivers a renewables project, who delivers a carbon capture project. Now, if we don't take that sector with us, if we don't work in partnership with them, then I'm afraid that we're not going to be able to meet our net zero targets, and we need to have a grown-up assessment and discussion when it comes to these things, because the people who work in the industry, some of whom are members of my family, many of whom are my neighbours in Aberdeen, they're engineers, they're chemists, they're geologists, they're abseilers. These people have jobs, many of whom can transfer directly into the renewable sector. They want to see those jobs, but in order for those jobs to be realised, we need the UK government to take its head out of the sand and focus on what comes next, because ultimately oil and gas is a finite resource. The best way for Scotland to secure energy security in the long term is to really invest in our green renewable sector, of which we have far too much in comparison to most nations. And we should be shouting from the rooftops about that and making sure that we have secure employment for everyone in the decades to come. In
terms of that, I mean, this is what we're going to see today, is the Prime Minister coming north, planting his flag right in your turf and promising big jobs and big money. You're going to tell me you're not worried about that with an election looming, but you must be.
I mean, this is a party, the Conservative Party, which given us 13 years of austerity, has given us Brexit.
Still quite popular in your part of the world, aren't they? I mean, they're your biggest threat in your constituency.
If I may, this is a Conservative Party which gave us 13 years of austerity, which has given us Brexit, which gave us multiple Prime Ministers, multiple Chancellors, which crashed the economy, which has taken Scotland's energy resource and basically splashed it up a wall over many decades, leaving people in Scotland, an energy-rich nation, in fuel poverty.
So you're not worried that this announcement is going to impact on your vote?
I'm not worried that it's taken 18 years for the Westminster establishment to realise that carbon capture and storage is a good thing for the north east of Scotland, and I'm proud that I've managed to play a small part in making sure that it stays on the agenda, and I'm glad it's going to be delivered for my constituents. But I think we, as a nation, need to reflect on the fact that it has taken Westminster 18 years to realise Scotland's potential on one small item which will help us meet our net zero objectives. What else are they holding us back on?
Is there not a comparison to be drawn there? Your party promised us 120 renewable jobs by now. We've got about a fifth of that.
I think there's a lot more than 120 jobs in Scotland.
120,000, sorry.
Okay, sorry, you must have misspoke there.
Thank you for picking me up on that.
No, that's all right. You're quick enough to pick me up on these things, so it's all's fair. Look, we've sought to do everything that we possibly can to accelerate Scotland's renewable workforce. You know, onshore wind in comparison to England is through the roof. We've done exceptional things in that. We've sought to expand offshore wind at a dramatic rate of knots through the ScotWind licensing project. But of course, energy is a reserved matter, Martin. And when it comes to CCS, when it comes to tidal Stream. When it comes to pumped hydro storage, of course, the Cruachan development, the Corrie Glass development with SSE, they're all still waiting on the UK government to sign them off as well. So I think what this entire episode shows us is that Scotland's energy future should be in the hands of the Scottish people, not in Whitehall's.
OK. Stephen Flynn, thank you very much indeed for being with us on Good Morning Scotland this morning. Stephen Flynn there, the SNP Westminster leader.